Simpson. I'm curator at the Williamson Art Gallery and Museum in Birkenhead in the UK. Birkenhead sits on the Wirral Peninsula, which is close to the coastline between the River Dee and the River Mersey and by the side of the Irish Sea. And our history and our museum collections reflect that connection with the sea. We have ship models, we have ceramics, and we have a range of paintings that show the sea and the coastline in a variety of temperaments. I took this photograph a couple of weeks ago on the beach near me, and it brought to mind a painting which has long intrigued me. And the painting had been in my mind because the artist's name appeared while I was doing some research on a previous film that we made about our painting of Columbus leaving Spain in 1492 on his journey to America by Emanuel Leutze. Now, our painting of Columbus is the only painting by this artist represented in UK public collections as far as the Art UK website is concerned. And similarly, we have two paintings by an artist called Worthington Whittredge, and they are also the only two paintings by that artist that are recorded in public collections in the UK. The name of Whittredge surfaced in my mind while I was doing the research on Emanuel Leutze, because Leutze did a portrait of him in his studios in New York at the 10th Street Studios. And so when you look into it, you find that while Leutze was born in Germany, moved to America, and then went back to Europe to train and ended up in Dusseldorf, Whittredge had been born in the United States, but moved to Europe to learn his craft and ended up also in Dusseldorf and became friends with Leutze. More than that, Leutze's most famous painting in America, in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, is of Washington crossing the Delaware. And Whittredge posed for the figure of Washington. So there's this connection between the two of them as artists. And Leutze travelled back to America, as did Whittredge. And Whittredge was interested not in the history paintings that Leutze did, but he was interested in landscape painting. And when he moved back to America, he became part of the Hudson River School, who were based around New York State. And it was their aim to develop a style of American landscape painting which was distinct from European paintings. We have two paintings, as I mentioned, by Whittredge in our collection. One of them is a scene in the Adirondacks. Now, the Adirondacks are a range of mountains in the northern part of New York State as you approach the Canadian border. And the scene is from a high viewpoint, looking over an extensive land. It's a very cinematic view, looking over this enormous expanse of territory. And there's something of the American optimism and forward-looking and sort of boundary breaking, if you like, that you can see there. There is a figure in the foreground. You can't quite see what the figure's doing. But as you look further back, you can see this vista opening out, the smoke curling up from a homestead. This is a characteristic American style landscape. There's something distinctly un-European about it. Whittredge carried on painting a lot of American landscapes, and he focused on sort of tree-bound river scenes, as well as these extensive plain landscapes, but also seascapes, which is part of what our other painting is on the New Jersey shore. To return to our painting of the New Jersey shore by Worthington Whittredge. When you start looking into an artist that you don't know anything about, the internet is a fund of all sorts of information. But you also stumble across books that you didn't know existed. And there is a book about Worthington Whittredge. And on looking at this on a small screen, I thought I'd found our painting, or an illustration of our painting. As soon as I looked in a little more detail and on a bigger screen, I realised from the text that the measurements were wrong. So it was a rookie mistake. But what it shows is that the artist was using an image that he'd found and was recreating it at different scales. Not an unfamiliar thing for artists to do, even today, but certainly in the 19th century, where, but on the whole, the Hudson River artists didn't work on plein air. They worked in their studios in New York, and the 10th Street Studios was sort of the centre. It was the biggest artistic centre for painters in New York at the time. So the basics of the composition are almost identical, but the measurements are wrong. A little extra research found that I did find the painting that was illustrated, which when the book was published, the whereabouts were classed as unknown, and it went through a sale room in New York a few years ago. But looking at our painting, which is the same thing on a larger scale, you can see that we're on the east coast of America. Looking out, it's a morning scene, it's bright, it's sunrise, and you have the waves coming in. You have waders, wading birds in the foreground. An early ship is out on the horizon sailing with the sun catching it. And there are hints of pink in the sky and reflected in the waves. It's an optimistic view, in my view. A scene looking out at a seascape with hope and with vibrancy. But there are footsteps on the sand, which gives us a slightly sort of nostalgic air, which I find rather poignant. At this point, I think this is probably, it's undated, but we think it's from the 1880s. Whittredge was in his mid-60s as an artist. His star had somewhat waned. He was going slightly out of fashion. And by that time, Americans were travelling increasingly in Europe, seeing European paintings, and styles were changing in Europe because the Impressionists were becoming more a feature of art. And some American artists were picking that up. And what we've got is an artist who is trading to some extent on his reputation, on recycling images that are familiar, and hoping to eke out a living. He lived from 1820, he lived until 1910. So he was, I think he died shortly before his 90th birthday. He lived in New Jersey in his later years. And he was capable of great things as a painter, but he had gone slightly out of fashion, I think. There is another later portrait of him by an artist of that next generation, William Merritt Chase, in his studio again, as an older man, a more mature reflection on the life of an artist. But here in this seascape, we have a sort of a look of optimism and nostalgia, optimism tinged with nostalgia, I would say. And it's a fascinating thing. And what we next need to do is research how these paintings came to be in Birkenhead. They have been in our museum collection since 1925, bequeathed by our Mrs. I.G. Brunt, who lived locally, only a mile or so away from the gallery. But a little more research may show how they got to Birkenhead in the first place. So that's a story to unfold at a future date, I hope. Thanks very much.